Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Gribbin and I will be talking about locomotive engineers. What are locomotive engineers? Locomotive engineers are responsible for the safe movement of trains. They operate air brakes, power throttles, and handbrakes under the Book of Rules. They must be vigilant and aware of their territorial changes and be concentrated without distraction. They work either in the yard or on the road, also known as the main line. They are a unionized workforce, no matter what railroad. They are mostly represented by the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. Commuter railroads are represented by the Association of Commuter Railroad Employees. In 2019, according to datausa.io, 74.1% of locomotive engineers are Caucasian or white. 14.6% of engineers are African American. Also, according to datausa.io, the average male engineer salary is $92,568 a year, while the female engineer salary is $56,749 a year. With Arendt's view, is locomotive engineering work, labor, or action? Hannah Arendt's view on labor is something that is repetitive. It is work that is necessary. Arendt's view on work is something you create and something new for society to use that also meets needs. Arendt's view on action is a movement and action to create something that benefits society as a group. Using Arendt's view, locomotive engineering would be labor because you do something repetitively. You drive trains 5 days a week and you do not create anything with your job. Since you're governed by the Book of Rules, whether it be the signals, operating rules, track speed, the train dispatcher, road foreman, you don't really have the power to exempt yourself from anything. And you don't have that ability to create any new rule, so it is considered labor. According to Veltman, is being a locomotive engineer meaningful or meaningless work? Andrea Veltman's view on meaningful work is work that you gain something from. For example, any skills, practices, or any enjoyment from your work. Veltman's view of meaningless work is work that is needed and must be done, but it is repetitive, and you can't gain any skill or insight from. Unlike Arendt's view, locomotive engineers might operate trains 5 days a week, but working conditions are different every single day. You might operate a train in the snow, rain, thunderstorm, blizzard, or even a tropical storm in certain cases. Also, you will have different equipment conditions, whether it be different consist, any train problems. If there is problems, you'll have to address the problem with your crew and foreman. You can be creative with stopping your train and power braking. As an engineer, you might get an insight of how to operate better than others for a smooth ride. According to Veltman, being a locomotive engineer would be meaningful because you can express yourself through your work and you gain operating skills. Also take note, locomotive engineer is a very demanding position. You have to work your way up to become a locomotive engineer. A lot of people who work for the railroad that are engineers started out as coach cleaners, machinists, carmen, linemen, or any entry-level job. And then they can bump up to a conductor and learn the operations portion of the railroad, and that gives them skills to become a locomotive engineer and operate the trains using air brakes, the power throttles, etc., under the Book of Rules. And being a locomotive engineer will give you the skill of of promoting yourself to train dispatcher, road foreman, general foreman, yard master, train master, or any supervisory roles. What is the end goal of being a locomotive engineer? The end goal of becoming a locomotive engineer is to operate locomotives and cab cars safely while following the book of rules. They must know every square inch of their operating territory and physical characteristics. They need to know what each sign is and means, and also each signal and what they mean also. They need to know what speed limit is over every section of track and working limits. On top of those responsibilities, engineers not only have to be aware, but they absolutely cannot be intoxicated or under the influence of drugs and or alcohol. They must be sober in order to operate safely. Since a locomotive engineer is a safety-sensitive position, the railroad, also known as the employer, will administer a random drug and alcohol testing. Just a few things to go over here. What physical characteristics mean in comparison. When you drive in your neighborhood or your hometown or your state, you know where each street is, which highway, um, what's traffic light, where the traffic lights are, stop signs, any signs along the way, you know what they mean. Physical characteristics is the exact same thing, but for the railroad, you need to know where each signal is and what each signal means. You need to know each speed limit and where those are located. For speed limits, it could vary. You can go from 60 to 90 miles per hour. You can go from 90 to 125. You can go from 90 to 50 miles per hour. You need to know all these different speed changes. And as for the end goal, whether it's Amtrak, Metro North, Long Island Railroad, New Jersey Transit, CSX, any railroad employer is looking for engineers to adhere safety rules and understanding of their physical territory which they're operating on in a safe manner. On the job resistance. That Volia glimpse view on resistance is doing work poorly, working inefficiently, being rude to your employer or other employees. Locomotive engineers tend to not resist their job for the most part. After all, it is a very demanding position. A lot of people work very hard to become. Some engineers will ignore instructions, whether it be general notices or general orders. And some people bid for jobs that is less work, more for your buck. Like, for example, one of my friends who works for Amtrak is a locomotive engineer and operates out of New Haven, Connecticut. His job is to go to New York and back. But here's the thing. Even though it's a 6-hour shift, whether you go to New York, you lay over, and you come back and you're done, that's in total of 6 hours. But you get paid 8 hours for 8 hours pay. If you go to Boston, that's an 8-hour shift and you get paid 8 hours pay. So some people or some engineers will go to different jobs, do less work for the same pay as the same hours and the same pay. How do the work of locomotive engineers impact their moral character? Since locomotive engineers drive trains for miles and miles and miles, their work doesn't make a huge impact on their moral character or choices. However, accidents happen, such as suicides, grade crossing, accidents, etc. With suicides, a lot of engineers will operate the operating territory, and some people unfortunately take their lives, whether they jump from the station platform, um, people driving over crossings and getting stuck and getting hit by train. And as an engineer, you are the last person to see the victim before an accident. And that's really hard for people to grasp. And that gives them the stress to come back. Most engineers will take roughly 6 months to a year off. Some people take two. It unfortunately happens all the time on the subway. On the radio, it's called 12-9. That means the train has hit an object or a person on the tracks. Because of that, a lot of engineers will get PTSD. They do not want to have that stress of that happening again, and sometimes they just leave and they don't want to come back because they don't want it to happen again. What is the quality of life as a locomotive engineer? The railroad work shifts and pay is all about seniority. The person with most seniority will get the most options of shifts, and the person with the fewest options get the least shifts and the starting rate of pay. In an interview of an unidentified locomotive engineer from Metro North, administered by Jim Cameron, the engineer explains, twice a year, when the timetable changes, all the assignments are rearranged based on seniority. The first pick goes to the engineer with the most seniority, which is 33 years on the job, which means the last hired pick up the crumbs nights and weekends. Unfortunately, with the railroad, since everything is based out of seniority, a lot of people start working late nights, very early mornings, holidays, weekends at very odd hours. And if you have a family, if you're in a relationship, that will definitely interrupt your time with them. And sometimes that doesn't always work out. But since it is based off of seniority and you stick with the job, you'll gain seniority and you will have the freedom to choose which jobs you want to take and which hours and which job bases and days and locations. Is the work of a locomotive engineer necessary according to Martin Luther King? King's view on necessary work is work that benefits society and helps maintain it and has dignity. Locomotive engineers drive trains to and from different terminals. Some trains are freight that carry goods like produce, toys, minerals, packages, etc. Passenger trains transport people to work, home, school, even parties. Whether it's passenger or freight engineers are necessary because they do help society by growing communities, whether it's transit-oriented development or new rail lines or as simple to travel. In short, trains don't drive by themselves yet. Someone has to drive them, and a lot of people rely on rail transportation to go to their destination. Not everyone has a car. So the work of a locomotive engineer is definitely necessary, according to King, because they do drive trains that carry people, or like I said before, carry goods on a freight train, like toys, wood, minerals, packages, and that helps our economy, whether it is transit-oriented development in a community, bringing people to a new area, um, helping the farm industry, moving produce. They are very important. And here's my sources. And just to let you know, all of the photos used in this presentation are mine, and they are not officially published anywhere. Thank you very much.